Hi, I'm Alexa Tomaras with WCAT. Today I'm here with author Mr. Bill Deresiewicz, and he is going to be talking to me about his book, Excellent Sheep, and how it applies to the Westminster community. Thank you so much for being here with
You're
us
welcome.
today.
It's a
I'm
pleasure.
very excited to talk to you. So your book is called Excellent Sheep.
Yes.
So could you first distinguish, first and foremost, what is
an excellent sheep?
Yes.
Well, first of all, the phrase came out of the mouths of one of my students at Yale. I was an English professor at Yale for 10 years.
Okay.
And in a moment of kind of dawning collective self-recognition, like, oh my God, me and my friends are all excellent sheep. And I think it's the perfect phrase to encapsulate what I'm talking about. You guys are the most excellent generation in the history of the world, meaning that you're great at being students, which really means that you're great at doing what the grown-ups want, what your teachers want, what your coaches want, what your parents want, the APs, the hoop jumping. That's not necessarily the same as intellectual curiosity or deep thought. It's great at being a student. But by the same token, because you're doing so much hoop jumping, you end up being hoop jumpers a lot of times, which means that when it comes time to make life choices for yourself, which is going to happen, you're often really lost, and you kind of follow the herd, whatever the herd happens to be in your school. Because you're not equipped to make, you haven't been making choices for yourself. You don't have practice making choices for yourself. So you don't know how to do it.
So what advice would you have, I'm a senior this year, so getting ready to go off to college, what advice would you have for students, and whether they be already in college or ready to go to college, to avoid becoming an excellent sheep?
Right, or to stop being one, because you
being one,
might be one already. One of the saddest things for me when I speak to students who are about to go to college or who just got to college is that they think that now that they're in college, the real learning is going to start, and I'm going to leave all of that hoop jumping behind. That's not how it works. Actually, you don't leave it behind until you decide to leave it behind. And there are people in their 40s and 50s who are still jumping through hoops at law firms or banks or wherever it is. So my advice is, take a step back and ask yourself why you're doing all of this. Whose demands are you satisfying? Are they your demands? Or are they parents, peers, all the pressure of your environment? Why am I doing this? Why am I going to college? What kind of education do I want to get? What kind of life do I want to lead? Because if you don't ask those questions, you're just going to keep going with the flow, because the flow is very powerful.
And I recognize in your book that it focuses on the education of the elite. So why did you make that distinguishment, and what does it really mean for you?
Right. I should say it's not that I made a choice to write about the elite. That's what I knew, right? I was a Yale professor. I went to Columbia. That was the world that I knew. Those were the students I was hearing from when I was writing about this stuff initially before the book. So I'm talking about the kinds of kids who go to fancy private high schools or public high schools in affluent districts, and who go to fancy private or public colleges, UVA or University of, the UC schools, right? A lot of kids like this. I mean, I think probably tens, if not hundreds of thousands every year who graduate from high school and enter that selective college admissions game. Those are the kids that I'm talking about.
That's very applicable to
it's
Westminster
why I'm here today, yes.
So I want to recognize another big problem in the college application that I'm sure you have an opinion on, which is the funding of college education. It's very expensive. So what would you say to the Westminster community about that?
So they're big social and economic forces that have created the situation that we're talking about, and that ultimately you're feeling in your own psyche, right? And one of those big forces is how we have systematically deprived public higher education of funding. In the early 70s, 3/4 of the money for state schools, like the University of Georgia, 3/4 came from the public, from taxpayers. Today it's 1/4.
Wow.
That's right. And that 50% difference, a lot of that is coming from students and families. That's why we have this explosion of student debt. People used to be able to work their way through state schools with minimum wage jobs. That's completely out of the question now. People graduate now with maybe $30,000 in debt. That's around the average. That limits people's choices. I mean, I recognize that that's part of what you're dealing with. And I think there are things that you guys can do as individuals to step away from the system. But if we're ever going to really take the temperature down, We need to make it possible for people to go to great public universities for no money. I mean, the UC schools, best system in the country, used to be free. Free, no tuition. I think we need to start by going back to that, and it's going to take a commitment of taxpayer dollars.
So how do you think the actions of politicians have been involved in that lately? Not at all?
Completely, all the way down the line. I mean, these are decisions that state legislatures have been making for decades. Now, I think some of the pressure is coming from taxpayers, but I think a lot of it is just a matter of philosophy. In general, we've withdrawn from the funding of public needs. It can be roads and bridges and tunnels, it can be public parks, it can be arts funding, all of that stuff, but also education, and especially higher education. And you saw a shift in the states from college funding to prison funding.
Wow, interesting.
Yes.
So what would you say if someone walked up to you and they said, I'm not really interested in going to college, I feel like I could do my life another way, what would you say to them?
I would say that can be a completely legitimate choice. Yeah. I would warn them and say a lot of professional opportunities are going to be closed to you if you don't have a college degree. But there's absolutely nothing wrong with not going to college. They're good, well-paying and personally fulfilling jobs that you can get, like in the skilled trades, without college. And I would also say, if you're not sure you want to go to college now, then the best thing to do is to wait and be in the world for a year or two, or however long it takes. Go back. If you go back to college, go back as a more mature person with a better idea of what you want to do. In fact, taking at least 1 year off, I think, is a very good idea for almost everybody.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And tonight you're talking to the parents of Westminster Community.
I am.
So how would your advice to them differ from your advice to the students? What would you tell them to say, maybe to their kids?
Well, sure, because what I would say to you guys is, and I'm so sorry that I missed a chance to talk to you because my plane was delayed, but what I was going to say to you guys basically is, stop worrying about what your parents think. So what am I going to say to the parents? I'm going to say, make it possible for your kids, to be independent of you. Your goal as a parent is not to get the window sticker on the BMW.
Yes.
Your goal is to raise an autonomous adult. And that means someone who's capable of defying you, just like you defied Grandma and Grandpa, because I'm sure you did. Right?
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Once again, I'm Alexa Tomaras with WCAT.